Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Itchon. On this podcast, we've pulled together our all-star team of ex-speechwriters to opine on the speeches at the Democratic Convention. We have Lance Izumi, Senior Director of PRI's Education Studies Program, but he was also Chief Speechwriter to Governor Duke Majan and a speechwriter for Attorney General Ed Meese. We have Tim Anaya, who is PRI Senior Director of Communications, and he was speechwriter to the Governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and other senior legislators. Finally, I was a speechwriter to Governor Pete Wilson and a lowly research assistant with President Reagan's speechwriting team. So I also have the perspective of the poor fact checker who, by the way, gets all the blame. So this will be fun, and don't forget to join us when we do the same for the Republican Convention. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's get started with the PRI All-Star ex-speechwriters. So let's start with this webinar talking head format. What are your overall impressions? Do you think it was effective? Do you think the rank and file tuned in? What do you think, Tim?
Well, there definitely was kind of a infomercial or telethon feel to this convention without an audience. You know, you had like these Hollywood stars like Eva Longoria and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and they kept saying, we know you're struggling due to the economic situation, but chip in $5 if you can, which I thought was just kind of weird. And they kept, make your voting plan and text this number. I wanted to yell out, don't text that number because you're going to get nonstop text messages and emails after you text that. I like Eva Longoria as an actress, but she's not a great talk show host. They should have gotten Jerry Springer, who's a Democrat. He would have been a much more entertaining host, I think. There were some advantages where you could go to people and see kind of the poignant imagery, like they had one gal was in front of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Overall, I thought it was kind of a choppy show. There were a lot of awkward short speeches. You had these kind of, slickly produced music videos and vignettes. I thought that was kind of hard to follow. The TV viewing was way down from 2016. I have here the first night it was 18.7 million viewers. That was down 27% from the first night of the convention. We have the early numbers for the big night, the Biden night. It was about 22 million, and that was down from 28 million in 2016. So,
Tim's right. I mean, one of the criticisms of the format is that it was one long infomercial. I mean, it really seemed to me more like one long Zoom conference call. And so, you had a lot of these people, zooming in from someplace, whether it was in their own homes or, in some locale. But it just seemed, and it's just the way it is because of the format, but it just seemed really stitched together. And I thought that because of that, the host had to be very, I thought, nimble and dexterous. And I don't think the hosts were really up to that to make it compelling. I agree with you, Tim, that I thought that Julia Louis-Dreyfus was, not as good as, she would be like if she were reading a script in one of her comedy shows. I just thought there were a lot of stilted and awkward exchanges between the hosts like Dreyfus and like Andrew Yang, when they were talking about Vice President Pence's name. And, I know it's meant to be sarcastic and funny based upon, people's pronunciation or mispronunciation of Kamala Harris's name. But it just seemed very awkward and stilted. It wasn't really funny. And the overall, it just struck me like this was like the Oscar show with a lot less talented people. As much as the Democrats wanted to, be authentic, I just thought it seemed to me to be like this fake convention, not just because of the webinar type format of the whole thing, but also because, they didn't really talk about the crime, the riots, public safety, didn't say a single word about any of that.
Well, I approach this as looking at it through a Democrat's lens, part of the rank and file Democrats. And I have to agree with you both. I thought it was very, very boring. And, I think the key problem, and we touched on it here, is that they save the best for last. I think if you were a Hollywood producer, you wouldn't run this that way. I think you would open up with a big bang, not unlike I was thinking of Indiana Jones, that old movie when the boulder comes rushing to try to kill Indiana, and you are just gripped at the first 5 minutes. And I thought that's what this needed. You were not drawn and you were not engaged in the opening moments, and I think they probably lost a lot of people there and then. And if you're, lucky enough to be in the West Coast like we are, who knows? Would you have stayed up to listen to Michele Obama's speech at, 11 o'clock at night? I mean, that's a tough ask, I think. But I will put my conservative hat on, and this time, and I thought that they really revealed their hand in some of the themes that they talked about, especially voting. I think it's clear that they are afraid that they're going to have a low turnout this November. So seems like every other speech was all about get out and vote.
I'd say another thing that didn't get great reviews were the Never Trumpers. And of course, your view on the Never Trumpers probably is where you stand on the ideological scale. They made a big play over all of the former Republicans who spoke at the convention. You had John Kasich and Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey, and Susan Molinari, the former congresswoman, Meg Whitman from California, former gubernatorial candidate, and they had Colin Powell. Cindy McCain narrated a video about Joe Biden and John McCain's relationship. Friend Karen Hanreddy was tweeting about it, and she said, "It's like a who's who of people no one wants to hear from." And I thought that was a pretty apt way to say it. So John Kasich, for example, he talked a lot about language and the vitriol and all of that. And I kept wondering, well, did that really turn off people's votes? I mean, Republicans knew that Donald Trump used foul language and was not a choir boy in 2016, and he still won the nomination. The American people knew all of that, and he was still elected in November 2016. So knowing all of that and factoring it in, what makes them think that all of a sudden people are going to be offended by that now? I thought he focused more on foul language, where he could have made the case that Trump is actually not governing as a Republican on policy areas like free trade or prescription drug price controls or government overspending. That would have been a more effective way to appeal to disaffected Republicans than language. And then when we talk about the optics of this virtual show, so Kasich vouches that Joe Biden is not that far to the left. And who is the speaker right afterwards is Bernie Sanders, who's talking about how far left President Biden would be and how the Sanders people like Joe Biden on all of these things. Ro, what did you think?
Well, if I were rank and file Dem, I think that portion of the convention would have been a good time to run and get some snacks at the fridge, pour myself another glass of wine. I would have found it useless. On the other hand, if I were kind of a moderate Republican, I think I would have made my decision about Trump a long time ago. If I were going to vote for him, I don't think any of those Republicans would have changed my mind.
I mean, there was nothing to them. I mean, it was all talk. There was no substance to any of their cases for voting for Biden. Tim, you mentioned that Kasich made a big thing about saying that, well, Biden is not going to govern far left. Well, what reasoning did he give for that? I mean, simply his own assurance that I know Joe Biden and that's not who he is and he won't govern far left. Well, why should we trust you? I mean, give us some real substantive reasons why you believe that won't happen and why, the history and the record shows that won't happen. And instead, he just said, take my word for it. Well, you know something? Most Republicans didn't take John Kasich's word for anything, which is why he was a total also ran back in 2016. And if John Kasich is so anti-Trump and thinks that anybody is better than Trump, why didn't he drop out of the 2016 race and support Ted Cruz, who was the only viable candidate left against Trump? Instead, Kasich stays to the very bitter end because it's all about his own ego. Like Meg Whitman, I couldn't believe what she said, that that Joe Biden would actually do a better job on the economy than Donald Trump. Where has she been living in the pre-COVID 3 years of Donald Trump's administration when the economy was, skyrocketing like a missile? I mean, where was she? I mean, and Colin Powell, again, we shouldn't be surprised that he's out there, against Trump, because he's ever since George W. Bush, and maybe even George W. Bush, he's been against, the Republican presidential candidates. He endorsed Obama, twice. He endorsed Hillary Clinton. I do a lot of work with the military, and if you care about our soldiers and their safety, you don't put them into wars that are endless and that have no good, clear objective. And something, President Trump has realized that and has spoken against the whole concept of endless wars. He is very pro-soldier, pro-military, but he cares about them so much that he doesn't want to put them in harm's way if there's no clear national interest objective. And so after that, let me ask our other panelists here about the Democrats are moving farther to the left, and but yet many in their party probably felt a little bit shortchanged in favor of these never Trumpers. So what do you think, Ro and Tim? Do you think that they did get shortchanged, the left progressive wing of the party? And how did you think that the performance of Bernie Sanders and AOC were during the convention? Ro, let me ask you first.
Well, I have to say, and I'm trying to put on a Democrat lens here. I thought these were some of the best speeches in the whole convention. I thought AOC's 60-second socialism really was packed with, you got to believe, every kind of, socialist-ism that she can probably put pack in 60 to 90 seconds, or however, time she had. And I thought she delivered it with passion and a lot of sincerity. And we know that Bernie can absolutely steal a show. And again, I felt like he delivered a victory speech, a triumphal speech in the way that he said that, a lot of, my agenda that was considered radical just a few years ago is now on the platform. Well, there you are, and he delivered it very well. I thought, Elizabeth Warren did a pretty good job, with that backdrop of the schoolroom. I think the Democratic organizers of the convention, failed to remember the first law of marketing and communications and writing speeches, which is know your audience. I think if their intent was to shore up their base, which you got to admit, it's gone left, further left than they think, they failed miserably. Think of if they had gone a little further left, how dramatic the images would be. You'd have homeless people, you'd have homeless children, you'd have clips of the protests and so on, and it would have made better television and captured more imagination from their base. And they lost sight of that. And I think a lot of people were unhappy about it.
Tim, what do you think?
AOC and some of the people on the far left were publicly upset that so much time was given to people like John Kasich, trotting out all these people like AOC and Bernie Sanders. It's clear that he did have some mending of fences to do after winning the nomination. Because remember, Bernie people were booing loudly on the first night of the convention in any mention of Hillary's name. And that was one benefit of having this as a virtual event. You didn't have people there. They might have been booing at home, but nobody saw them booing at home. I thought that Bernie Sanders, it was his standard fare, kind of an angry talk of millionaires and billionaires and Social Security under attack and all of that. He did kind of lift the mask off of the so-called moderate Joe Biden. He rattled off a laundry list of these kind of big government socialistic proposals that he says Joe supports. And he also underscores what our Sally Pipes has been saying all along, that Joe Biden's public option is really a stepping stone to Medicare for all. At the end of the day, Ro's right. Know your audience. Is the audience we need to shore up the base? Or is the audience the swing voters in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Florida and Arizona that are going to decide the election? And, if you're having to spend too much time on your base, I would consider that a sign of weakness. Lance, what say you?
Well, something. I really think that Bernie gave probably the best speech of the night. Of the convention. And I thought AOC did very well too in her limited amount of time. I mean, the reason is because I really think that when you look at the real world out there beyond the confines of this webinar convention, is that where Bernie and AOC are is really where the Democrat Party is. I mean, the Democrat Party is not the party that John Kasich hopes it'll be. The Democrat Party is where Bernie Sanders and AOC are right now. They're the tail that's wagging the Democratic dog right now. Really, they would probably, part of the most unfake portions of this pretty fake convention.
Well said, Lance. So, we also heard from the ex-presidents, Obama and Clinton. So ex-presidents, their speeches, they're supposed to take the high road, to be high-minded, to be visionary. So do you think they accomplished this?
Well, I'll take a first crack at that. I mean, I thought Clinton was pathetic. I mean, he was criticizing, the big headline from Clinton's speech was, Clinton criticizes Trump for creating chaos in the White House. Well, why would Clinton say that when he himself created the biggest chaos literally in the White House with his affair with Monica Lewinsky? You even have a person like Stephen Colbert who said about Clinton, people in glass houses shouldn't be allowed near the interns. That was his joke for the night, And so I just think that when Clinton says a whopper like that one, whatever else he said, people are just thinking, what the heck? I think with Obama, you have to look at what the guy is saying. He criticized Trump, very, very harshly. He said that he's shown no interest, meaning Trump, shown no interest in putting in the work, no interest in finding common ground, and no interest in using the awesome power of his office to help anyone but himself and his friends. Well, who had no interest in finding common ground? It was the Democrats in Congress. Secondly, I laughed actually when Obama said that he began his search for vice president, 12 years ago, and he didn't know he would end up finding a brother. And I thought, really? Well, if he's your brother, why did you wait to the very last minute to endorse him for president? I mean, that's some kind of brother. I mean, if a brother like you, I don't need enemies. And the last thing I thought, and this again is from a military point of view, Obama said they understand that in this democracy, the commander-in-chief doesn't use men and women of our military who are willing to risk everything to protect our nation as political props. Well, the Democratic National Convention used members of our military as political props. In fact, one of the states, I believe it was either Guam or Samoa, actually used uniformed members, I believe, of the Army as props standing behind the delegates giving their votes to Biden. And the Pentagon issued a reprimand to the Democrats saying that you cannot use members of the military in uniform as political props. And the Democrats' response was, oh, it was an oversight on our part. Well, in that case, maybe you should have blue-lined Obama's speech a little bit more.
It was interesting staging for the speech that he was standing in front of a wall that said, writing the Constitution in Philadelphia, as many would argue Barack Obama did a lot of things as president that may not be constitutional. I thought that he gave a very effective critique that Trump has not taken the job seriously, hasn't grown into the job of president. When we talk about knowing your audience, he knew his audience. His audience was about undecided or uninformed voters, or perhaps to add to that, unmotivated voters. Of course, he recited all of the left's grievances with Trump, but he forcefully pushed back on them. So I thought if you're a Democrat, you would be cheering Barack Obama during his speech. I thought the most effective part was when he addressed young people and others who might be cynical or think it doesn't matter if they vote. And I thought he gave a pretty powerful and effective exhortation to them to get involved and vote. I also thought So, whether you agree with him or not, he's at a whole different level than most of the speakers at this convention. Now, for Bill Clinton, I thought it was interesting. They did a poll before the convention among Democrats of who would you like to see speak. And only 56% of Democrats said that they wanted to hear Bill Clinton speak. And that was one of the lowest numbers. He's known as the master of the Democratic conventions. He's been known in the past for making a case like a prosecutor. I thought he did just okay, kind of making his case why Trump should be fired as president. One thing that I thought Clinton did that was, and he was probably about the only person during the whole week to do this, they say that Clinton has a unique ability to connect with white working class voters. And I thought he perhaps offered the only words at this whole convention to appeal to, the white working class voters in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Florida and these key states that are going to swing the election. Ro, what did you think?
Well, I would not have written Obama's speech this way. I would have tried to, since he is the kind of the senior statesman of the Democrat Party, that I would have tried to take the high road in terms of policy. But instead, I think he spent the first third of his speech criticizing the character of Donald Trump. Then he spent the next third elevating Biden and his working relationship with Biden. And then finally, again, the old, refrain of get out and vote. So I would not have written it this way. I would have spent a lot more time, again, on the principles of the Democratic Party. As far as Clinton's speech, well, honestly, the only thing I can remember about it is that when he said Oval Office, that just triggered, laughs in my mind. I think he said the Oval Office should be a command center and not a storm center. Well, all I could think of was the blue dress. And so, his speechwriters, they should know by now that they should never let Bill Clinton say the words Oval Office.
Well, let's talk about the woman who he was hiding from in the Oval Office and the other wives of the candidates who were center stage this week. Let's start with Michele Obama. I thought it was perhaps the most effective speech, certainly on Monday night and perhaps the whole week. I thought it was very powerfully written, very powerfully delivered. Agree with her or not, she was probably the star of the convention. Taking Trump's line, it is what it is, and turning it back on him was devastatingly effective. Her appeal is that she's kind of like a political Oprah. And, her talk about the Trump administration not being empathetic in any way, that's sure to resonate with suburban women who are already kind of apprehensive about how they're going to vote. I think one of the most important things about political communication is relatability. And I don't think there was much relatability throughout most of this convention, except from Michele Obama. Yes, she gave a full-throated defense of her husband's legacy, but she really made a strong pitch, I thought, to quote-unquote soft Democratic voters about why it's so important to vote. Now, Jill Biden, I thought she was a breath of fresh air because, unlike Michele Obama, and even though Michele Obama said she disdains politics, she is a political person, as is Hillary Clinton. She really comes across as more of a real person. As she said and was said many times, she continued to teach her classes all 8 years she was second lady. And it was obvious, you could see in her delivery, she was a little uncomfortable delivering her remarks. I thought it was really touching to hear the stories of how she joined the Biden family and kind of helped to pick up the pieces after Joe Biden's first wife and his daughter were tragically killed. There was this line, how do you make a broken family whole? The same way you make a nation whole, with love and kindness. And I thought it was really hopeful and a hopeful and uplifting and unifying speech. Finally, Hillary Clinton, I thought her speech was so awkward. That was very badly delivered. It almost seemed like she didn't believe anything she was saying. There was no emotion. She just seemed aggrieved. She just kind of read a standard list of policy positions produced by the campaign. Finally, you just can't help but see, and it comes across in her body language, it just oozes sour grapes every time you hear Hillary Clinton talk about Donald Trump.
Tim, the great thing about these podcasts that we all do is that, even though, people might think, oh, they're all just going to agree with each other, it's not really true. And so, I'll be contrarian here. And I'll say that I agree with you that, Joe Biden gave a great speech. And I thought that if you were to rank them, I thought Joe Biden gave the best speech. I actually thought Hillary was probably middling, probably second. But I then thought that Michele Obama actually gave the worst. And so let me tell you why. I think that family story is very effective. It is an interesting family story. It's a family story that has some emotion with it, with Joe Biden's first wife and daughter passing away in the car accident, and how Joe Biden came into this situation and was able to help heal the family, and to talk about her support for Joe. So I really think that it's a great personal story that she has to tell, and also about her own career and what she did as second lady. So I thought it was a very authentic and very effective, and in cases some places moving speech. Hillary, I thought it was Hillary. I mean, she could have been on Oprah. She could have been on Ellen. She could have been on any of those shows. And basically, she's given this speech over and over again as to, the failings of Donald Trump. But it was, neither better nor worse than her usual blatherings about Donald Trump. So that's why I gave her a middling grade, because it was just her. But the reason why I'm contrarian about Michele Obama is that I would have probably given her an incredibly high rating, except that she made her whole emphasis of her speech was on empathy. And yes, you're right, Tim. That's to play to this maybe suburban women, certain demographic. So so she's using empathy as her big political card in her speech. But in order to be empathetic, you have to be empathetic to the whole American people. And so she was only empathetic to a slice of the American people. The fact that she couldn't bring herself to say anything about empathy for the people who have lost their businesses in the riots, for example, people who have been injured, or, in cases of, for example, the federal police officer in Oakland, or the retired St. Louis police officer, people who have gotten killed, in some cases assassinated during these riots. The fact that she couldn't even say an obligatory word or two about those people just made her remarks so, if not inauthentic, just so politically calculating that it totally put me off.
Well, I have a different opinion from both of you. So I would give Jill Biden the best speech among the three. She made me like her. I didn't know much about her. The speech was, as Lance said, was very, or maybe Tim, someone said that it was very refreshing. The audience got to know her. I got to know her. And frankly, if Donald Trump loses the election, I would be proud to have her as my first lady. I thought she is a tremendous woman, a lovely woman, and I thought she gave, probably in my opinion, the best speech of the convention. Hillary, well, I thought she was awkward and as odd as ever. She had this kind of wide-eyed look, and she had her chin way up, and I know all of us have taken media training. Now, everyone, you cannot have your chin sticking out when you're looking at the camera. Otherwise, you look conceited and arrogant, and that's exactly what she looked like. And I thought she was a total turnoff, and I think a lot of Democratic women would have felt the same way. And what was she doing there anyway? She just looked like sour grapes, and she gave her yet another pitch for go out and vote. Michele, I thought she was okay. I think the expectations for her were high, and she rose to the occasion. So that tells me she didn't really surprise. She didn't really, and she was the first night, so everybody was raving about her. But I think at the end of the day, I think Jill Biden gave a better speech, and Michele Obama gave the kind of speech that she was supposed to give, and she did it. And And there it is.
Well, let's talk about California's own governor, Gavin Newsom. He had a relatively small role. There was uncertainty about whether he would even appear at the convention or not. What are your takes on Governor Newsom's appearance at the convention? Ro, why don't we go with you first?
Well, you guys will probably cringe with what I'm about to say, but I thought he made a terrific little 3-minute speech. I'm wearing a Democratic hat again, but you have to agree, there were there's beautiful California redwoods in the background. He talked about real policy, climate change, causing the wildfires. He talked about Trump thwarting his efforts in California, the great work of Biden. He even, tipped his hat off to Kamala Harris, a daughter of California. And on top of that, he looked really good, and kind of out there in the wilderness, kind of man in the wild. So I don't know if he could have done much better.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, I think this was another example of where having a virtual convention played to his advantage. Just the image of him, among the forest on his iPhone, it was kind of cool, I thought, and it really underscored the message that he was trying to deliver, because he could show it right there to the audience at home. The one bit of his speech that I thought was interesting was apparently he had taped a speech for the convention ahead of time, and then with the wildfires raging.
And I'd just make one observation, and this is not necessarily just about Gavin, but about how the Democrats were talking. One of the big talking points during the convention was, how there were so many people in this country who have lost their jobs under during the COVID crisis, and that it's all Donald Trump's fault. But, if you think about it for more than half a second, it's not Trump's fault for the most part. It's a lot of it. The blame has to do with the way Democrat governors have basically kept their states locked down throughout this entire crisis. And, we've seen lots of instances where small business owners have wanted to open up, but Democratic governors have come down on them. And, Gavin Newsom is no different than that.
So let's say a few words about Kamala Harris and her acceptance speech. I thought that she probably didn't really help the ticket much. I like the opening of her speech. You got to know her. She said it with a passion and kind of twinkly and sparkly when she talked about her family. But then after that, I think her speech took a dive. It was all pure boilerplate. And I was hoping that, as California's top cop, as AG, she would have been the perfect person to talk about the current riots, even condemn them. But, I guess that the Dems are so afraid of offending their far left that they couldn't even bring themselves to do that. But, as a professional woman, if I were a Dem, I would have expected her to say something about this because it would be a big concern of mine. And she failed. And now you can kind of see why she blamed out early in the presidential campaign. How about you, Tim?
Well, I agree. I mean, I thought that overall it was an awkwardly delivered and awkwardly written speech. Though there were some powerful lines in the speech, I thought it was a very disjointed message. For the non-speechwriters listening, one of the worst things is when you have a speech that's, quote, written by committee, and usually big political speeches like this are written by committee. And it was obvious that lots of people had their hands over this speech, and it was very disjointed. I thought it was also a disservice to her that they staged the speech in a large empty hall, and at times, not having a crowd there. If you didn't know, the few people who were sitting out in the audience were reporters. So obviously they're not going to have the same reaction publicly during a political speech that a partisan activist would. So she almost didn't seem like she knew where to look. It was kind of weird afterwards with the Hollywood Squares boxes of people clapping at home. She almost didn't seem like she knew what to do with that. I thought this was a very powerful line. There's no vaccine for racism. We've got to do the work for equal justice under the law. None of us are free until all of us are free. I think if the speech had been written more powerfully along those lines, it could have actually been a quite transformational speech for her. But it was really kind of a missed opportunity for her. I don't know that she hurt the ticket really, but I don't think she helped them very much at all.
Well, I'd say I agree with you, Tim, and with you, Ro. That I think that the first part of her speech, her personal story, there's some interesting and sometimes compelling parts of her personal story, but I think that the rest of it was really just kind of, not only stitched together, but just kind of Democratic hack rhetoric. And I think that the people who are going to go gaga over Kamala Harris's speech and also her candidacy for vice president are going to be the Hollywood and CNN and MSNBC, Silicon Valley, some of those places. But I really don't think that she really helps the ticket in the battleground states. Is she going to help the ticket if Biden is losing ground in Minnesota, or if he's losing ground in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania? I don't really see that. I mean, she's got the most liberal voting record in the Senate, and so I don't see how that translates into helping the ticket. And I don't necessarily see that there was anything contained in this speech that is going to help Biden in those battleground states with those undecided voters who they're going to have to get if they're going to beat the president. And so therefore I think it's going to eventually be an uphill climb for them.
Well, now let's look at the main event, the Joe Biden speech. For my 2 cents, I thought, overall, it might have put the Sleepy Joe image to bed maybe once and for all. From the first moment of his speech, I thought Joe Biden seemed stronger and more in command than we've ever seen him in the 2020 campaign and for a long time, really. I thought it was a beautifully written and incredibly effective speech. And I thought it might have been perhaps the best political speech we've ever seen Joe Biden deliver. It was certainly one of the shortest speeches that a presidential nominee has delivered. I thought that was interesting. What was most effective was, he had the strong appeal for unity. This is not a partisan moment. This is an American moment. Yes, he had a very effective prosecution of the Trump administration, but it was always came back to this kind of hopeful vision of a unified America. But I couldn't help but think when watching what he had to say, the contrast with the divisiveness that we saw in the rest of the convention. The bottom line is, does any of the other kind of wokeness and goofiness that we saw in the rest of the convention matter after Biden delivered such a strong speech? There weren't a lot of policy specifics at all in the speech, and there usually aren't, to be fair, in a big speech like this. And what policy issues he did mention was kind of red meat for the left side of his party. I thought he did a very good job in realizing you're delivering the speech to the viewers at home rather than an empty hall. And I think if you're in the Trump campaign, you're afraid that this Joe Biden might show up in the 3 debates and, might not be the pushover that you think he's going to be out on the campaign trail. Ro, what say you?
Oh my gosh, I couldn't be further apart from you, Tim. I was actually rooting for Joe Biden to deliver a good speech. It's kind of the old speechwriter in me, and the expectations were so high for him not to flub it up, not to make those kind of goofy, get tongue-tied and make those goofy gaffes. And you can tell that he really tried to stick every word, every sentence. And to me, it sounded so labored, and he put in such tremendous effort. And I was almost kind of like, okay, you got that line. Okay, good. But I think that that kind of took away from a great smooth delivery. I just didn't see that. I didn't see what you saw. I thought it was he struggled, and though he kind of stuck his landing, it was kind of shaky. As for the content, I'm going to put my fact checker hat on. I just don't know how he can blame the spread of coronavirus to Donald Trump. When you look back at his record and some of his comments, he said he was softer on the coronavirus than Trump ever was. And if I were the fact checker of that speech, if I was a little research assistant, I would say, well, no, I don't know. I don't think you can say this. Look at this record. Look at this record. I don't know if anyone would have listened to me, but I don't know how he could kind of conscionably, go in front of the American people and say and condemn Trump for what he did on this coronavirus pandemic, and not, have a conscience about his own record and where he was at that time. And then he said a lot of things that weren't factually correct. I mean, he said things like Trump planned to gut Social Security. Well, that obviously wasn't the case. That's never been the case. And I was a little concerned about, when he talked about the dark days of America. And I know he did talk about hope, but he ended his speech in a very dark way. He had a long grimace at the end of the speech. And, I think you want a happy warrior when you're going to follow a president or a potential presidential candidate. You want this to be a good fight. You want it to be a happy fight and not an angry fight. And I felt that, he just, he didn't show a lot of leadership in that speech. And so, but then again, I really was rooting for him. I mean, my heart was with him because I wish he had done better. And in my eyes, I didn't think he got there. But, as a speechwriter and as someone who's an underdog and was kind of concerned that he wouldn't deliver a good speech, I was kind of rooting for him. What about you, Lance?
Well, this is interesting. I kind of fall a little bit between the two of you, maybe slightly more towards you, Ro. But I think on stylistic points, Joe had to me a very low bar to overcome. As long as he didn't flub up and say crazy things like he's been saying in the basement of his home for the last several months, I think people were going to chalk that up for a win for him. And he was coherent. He didn't flub up his lines. I agree with you, Ro, that he was straining to make sure he didn't flub up his lines. I harken back to that great movie, The King's Speech, where King George VI at the very end is delivering a speech to the British people about the start of World War II. And he's very focused on trying to make sure that he actually can get the words out because he's a famous stutterer. And I think that you had that feeling with Joe Biden, that he was focusing very hard not to make those mistakes that would make the headlines the next day. So he cleared that bar. I thought that he was also forceful and, in making his case. And so I think the combination of not flubbing up and being forceful, I think, is what the media is focusing on. But I think that, getting to what you talked about, Ro, in terms of the substance, I mean, some of the things that and again, I was trying to be very open-minded listening to his speech and, and actually giving benefits of the doubt, because I know that there are going to be red meat types of sections that he's got to throw to, to satisfy his base of support. The other thing that I thought about him along your lines, Ro, is that, did he connect with the audience? I think that he did strike me, even though he was, fairly coherent and forceful, he was not happy. He seemed more like your angry uncle at the dinner table than, really, kind of the warm, friendly guy that, the famous saying is that, Americans want to love their or like their president. And I don't know that Joe Biden came off very likable in his performance, despite the fact that he said all the right words without messing up. And so we come to the last part of our podcast here, and we're going to do a fast round. And so let me ask, our podcast panelists here several very quick questions. So who do you think had the best speech, Ro and Tim?
Well, I would give it to Jill Biden. I thought she was an effective advocate for Joe Biden, and her speech gave us a glimpse of who she is, and I really enjoyed it.
Tim?
I agree with Ro. I think Jill Biden by far was the best speaker of the convention. And I think Rose said it best. She just learning about her more, seeing what she had to say. You would be proud to have her as the first lady.
And I agree with you both. I think that Joe Biden gave the best speech. I thought that she helped Joe Biden. I thought that Bernie Sanders gave the second best speech because I thought that he was very authentic. Who do you think gave the worst speech?
Hands down, Hillary Clinton. I mean, it looked like she wasn't even trying to me. Awful start to finish.
What do you think, Ro?
Well, I think it's a tie between the Clintons. I thought they both gave really awful speeches.
I think it was Tammy Duckworth. Her first part of her speech, about her personal story in the military was great. But then when she called Donald Trump the coward in chief because of this totally unsubstantiated charge that, Donald Trump countenances the Kremlin putting a bounty on American soldiers' heads, which the Pentagon itself issued releases saying that this is unsubstantiated. There's no corroboration for this charge. And the fact that Tammy Duckworth used that in order to paint the president as a coward, I just thought was absolutely reprehensible. So what do you think is the best moment of the convention, Ro?
Well, I thought the best moment was what I had predicted would be the worst moment, which is the roll call. I dreaded the party roll call. I thought, well, that would be a good time to, fill up the snacks and get an extra glass of wine. But I loved it. I thought it was charming. I enjoyed every little 1-minute speech, and it was really fun.
Tim, what do you think?
Well, I agree with Ro again. I think this virtual roll call of states, it really was another thing where having a virtual convention was a plus. Americans could really see for themselves the beauty and diversity of the country with these little, video bits zoomed in from the different states. I think it's something they should do at every convention from now on.
And I thought the best moment of the convention was the end. And so what do you think was the worst moment, Ro?
Well, I thought the worst moment was the speech given by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. She completely glossed over the violence that was taking place in D.C. And what did she get for it? Black Lives Matter called her a hypocrite the following day.
How about you, Tim?
Well, my worst moment was when we saw Broadway and TV star Billy Porter, when he came out to sing a kind of a woke, famous protest song, wearing a dress with a clearly aggrieved or allegedly high Stephen Stills playing guitar. The video was very crudely put together. I mean, it looked like somebody edited it in their high school TV class. I thought it was one of the most awkward things I've ever seen. And it underscored one of the notions that we've been talking about throughout this podcast is know your audience. Who actually would find that appealing? What swing voter would say, watching that mess, say, yes, I'm now going to support the Democratic ticket?
Yeah. Hard to top that, Tim. My worst moment, there are lots of worst moments, but to pick just one, when Julia Louis-Dreyfus was uttering her very unfunny jokes, she at one point said that she expected Donald Trump to tweet the next day and call her a horse face. And I thought to myself, well, why would you say that? Because everyone knows that Joe Biden actually called a young teenage girl during the campaign a lying dog-faced pony soldier. And so, something, if that's what you're worrying about Donald Trump, then what do you think about the guy who we know actually uttered something along those lines? And that's your candidate. So anyway, and lastly, how would you rate, the both of you, the Democratic convention if you were a Republican or if you were a Democrat? And Tim, let's go to you first.
Well, I think if you're a Democrat true believer who believes in the fight for social justice and climate change and, want to be woke, you probably loved most of this convention. If you were a Republican watching this at home, you probably needed lots of sangria like I did to get through this whole thing.
Ro, what do you think?
Well, if I were a Democrat, I thought it was, I would think it was boring. So I would give it a 4. I would have expected better. But if I were a Republican, I'd give it a 10.
That's great. I think that, yes, I think it was boring. I think that there probably wasn't enough red meat, socialism really for the base of the Democratic Party. I think the Biden campaign tried to sugarcoat a lot of the things that Democrats now stand for, or simply ignore them. And so, there was no talk about defunding the police or any of those kinds of hot button things that most Democrats seemingly are supportive of now. So I don't think that, your average, maybe more hardcore Democratic voter, really enjoyed the convention, even if they managed to watch it. If you're a Republican, I don't think the Democratic convention gave you any reason to, consider voting for them. I mean, the Republicans they brought on were just totally unconvincing. And the fact that the Democrats, from Joe Biden on down, kept talking about unifying America, trying to bring Americans together, they had no actual strategy for actually doing that. And so therefore you can utter the word unity till you're blue in the face, but if you don't actually want to see the world from the other guy's shoes, or, from his or her eyes, then you're not going to be a unifier. And I don't think that the Democratic Party was able to make that case to the average Republican. So there we are.
Well, gang, we've got one more convention now to watch. So, this was certainly a chore to sit through 4 nights and 2 hours each night. I wanted to, to nickname this podcast, We Watched It So You Don't Have to. But join us next week. We're going to do it again.
That was a lot of fun. Thanks, guys.
I can't wait.
Thanks to Lance and Tim. And don't forget, if you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and now at iHeartRadio and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe, you can still go on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks again. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back for next round with PRI.